Nietzsche on why weak people seek control. The quietest hand in the room often grips the heaviest chain. You can hear it in a meeting where the air feels chilled by an invisible policy. In a school where the rules multiply whenever someone begins to glow. In a faith that promises salvation while tying every appetite to a guilt that never sleeps. We pretend control belongs to the powerful, the generals, the moguls, the men with signatures that rearrange skylines. Nietzsche asks a crueler question. What if control is most passionately desired by those who feel weak? He didn't mean weak the way bullies use the word, as a jeer. He meant weak as a structure of energy, a style of soul. Some people overflow. Their power spills into making, bear, risk laughter that startles. Others feel inwardly cornered, restless with grievances they cannot answer with action. And when action is not available, something else is invented. A system to make the world smaller and safer. A web of shoulds that ties the quick to the slow, the strong to the careful, the dangerous to the obedient. Behind this web stands a vocation, the rule maker, the referee, the moral accountant. He calls it priestly, not because it only lives in churches, but because it uses virtue as a bridle. Nietzsche wrote like a knife remembers fire. He lived in small rooms with bad health, migraines like storms, solitude that ate calendars. He despised pity when it froze into a pose, not because suffering bored him, but because he knew it. He watched himself grow weary, and then, on good days, blaze. He walked mountains to breathe. He learned to distrust any philosophy that smelled like resentment, disguised as righteousness. He became archaeology with a pulse, digging under our highest ideals to read the inscriptions carved in their foundations by the defeated. The story he tells is simple to describe and hard to swallow. Once, there were humans whose power expressed itself directly. They loved the bright words. Good meant noble, vigorous, excellent. Then there were others, more numerous, more cautious, injured in ways too old to count, who learned to survive by making value do the opposite. They inverted the light. They declared the bold arrogant, the independent selfish, the overflowing dangerous. They made weakness into virtue and called it humility. They made fear into wisdom and called it prudence. They made envy into justice and called it equality. Not equality before law, which protects the weak, but equality as a metaphysical revenge against whatever dares to rise. He calls this revaluation ressentiment, a French word he uses like a diagnosis, a slow poison of the soul that cannot act outwardly, so it fantasizes, remembers, nurses slights, until they become a doctrine. Think of it as trapped lightning. You feel your own lack, and cannot bear it. You could rupture the skin and grow, which is dangerous, or you could redesign the sky so that brightness is guilt. Ressentiment invents a moral police force in the head, then exports it to the town. Why would weak people seek control? Because control is the technology of security, where strength is the technology of creation. Control lets you bind what exceeds you. It turns a wild world into a chessboard with predictable moves, a universe of policies that make surprise look like sign. It is easier to write a code for living than to risk a life. It is easier to legislate fairness than to become someone whose fullness naturally overflows into generosity. It is easier to call appetite vulgar than to build a soul strong enough to steer it. And when you finally hold a lever, whether it is a pulpit, a desk in a dim office, a committee charter, or the soft power of public shame, you can arrange things so you never have to witness what frightens you. Unapologetic vitality. Nietzsche is not proposing a cartoon of villains. He insists on a more unnerving truth. Everything seeks power. Even weakness is a will to power. It will simply express itself differently. Through rules, through guilt, through the elevation of safety into a religion. He does not punish the weak. He despises the lie that denies the will to power while using its methods. He wants the confession no one dares. My power is small, so I will control what I can. Meanings, narratives, behavior, and call this goodness. Imagine a monastery built in a city that never asked for one. Bells at dawn, faces lit by candles and prohibition. The monks cultivate discipline and find a strange joy in abstinence. They chant about love, but the subtext is control. Of bodies, of thoughts, of timing, of appetite, of laughter. Now imagine the same monastery wearing modern clothes. Forms to fill, slogans about community. A perpetual tribunal convened by outrage and fear. The robes are gone. The spirit remains. Nietzsche names it the ascetic ideal. The selection of denial as a master key. The sanctification of no, masquerading as love of truth. It is a great invention for a species that needed order. It is also how a species can strangle its brightest children. The question catches in the throat. When you say ought, who benefits? The person who wants to create a world worth living in? Or the person who wants a world where no one outshines them? He is not asking you to discard morals. He is asking you to read the watermark in the paper. Whose fear printed this law? Whose wound wrote this hymn? Whose impotence is asking to become the constitution of your soul? We learn the early etiquette of control at home. The child who is brave is called reckless until she believes it. The child who is curious is told to sit still. The parent who resents their own unlived life installs dimmers in every room. Don't be so intense, says the world to the one who glows. Intensity is a threat to bureaucracies. Abundance makes rationing absurd. Control does not only come from institutions with seals. It comes from smaller, softer machines concerned looks, weaponized caution, the sigh that redefines your joy as burden. Nietzsche writes to break locks. He wants the strong to become more dangerous, which sounds terrifying until you see what he means. Dangerous to what? To laziness, to cruelty that hides in moral language, to compassion that humiliates, to routines that slowly kill. He wants vitality married to discipline. Yes, married to form. Laughter that knows suffering and refuses to make suffering an idol. He wants the union of ferocity and tenderness, a strength that does not need the world to be smaller to be safe. Before we can breathe that air, we have to admit something shameful. The prison keeper is often a version of us, frightened and persuasive, holding a set of keys cut from principles other people praised us for having. Control feels virtuous because it calms the nerves. That calm is a counterfeit of peace. The real thing is louder, stranger, riskier. It does not fit in a manual. Suspense lives in the gap between what a thing says it is and what it actually does. Nietzsche listens for the tone beneath the words. A familiar voice says, "We care. We are keeping you safe." Another says, "We must stamp out arrogance." A third, "No one should feel less than anyone else." These sound like kindness. Nietzsche hears something else breathing under the blanket. An anger at excellence, a dread of individuation, a will to immobilize volatility, a professionalization of pity that reduces others to what is manageable. He develops his ear by telling a genealogy a story of descent. Once, the powerful named themselves the good because they were good at living, vigorous, loyal to their clan, magnanimous when they could afford to be, careless when they couldn't. Their morality was active. They judged from their own overflowing. Then came another class, the priestly, born nimble in spirit and famished in body, convalescents of history. Unable to fight in the open field, they developed superior weapons, memory, imagination, language. They practiced a new warfare, not the spear, but the verdict. Not the wound, but the interpretation of the wound. They inverted the table and convinced the strong that their strength was an offense, their pleasure a sin, their pride an illness. The victory arrived not in the body, but in the calendar, over centuries with soft hands. This is not myth. It's a pattern. Watch the way jealousy halos itself in righteousness. The way fear rehearses the posture of wisdom. The way people who cannot say, "I want," say you should. Nietzsche calls this transvaluation a no that calls itself yes. It is not content to be one ideal among many. It must extend to everyone, everywhere. It must become the moral weather. If you declare that the path to goodness is weakness sacralized, you can rule a world full of self-doubt. He returns to the ascetic priest like a detective to a suspect who smiles too easily. The priest doesn't merely forbid. He gives meaning where pain would otherwise be meaningless. Your suffering is not random, he says. It is your fault. Your impulse is not energy. It is sign. Your joy is not a guide. It is a test. He offers relief, confession, compliance, the small safety of low horizons. He prescribes tight rooms for souls that might otherwise want to run. The sick adore him because he gives their condition a plot. Nietzsche respects the diagnosis and despises the cure. The priest's medicine preserves life by shrinking it. Better a quiet flock than wild creatures that might leap cliffs. Better shame than risk. Better monotony than tragedy. The world nods. The young age overnight. There is a chilling trick here. People who feel weak cannot tolerate the empire of chance. They discover that if you cannot control the future, you can still control the terms. You can become a specialist in definitions. Redefine courage as violence. Redefine caution as virtue. Redefine fairness as sameness. Redefine humor as harm. Redefine excellence as privilege. The trick is not to argue. The trick is to cement these redefinitions into air, so that to question them sounds cruel. Control succeeds most completely when it can stop being named control. It becomes how things are. Why don't the strong resist? Nietzsche says they are naive. They do not notice they are being robbed because their eye looks toward ferocious games. They laugh too easily, trust too quickly, assume malice is honest and can be negotiated with. They accept guilt because they recognize their own capacity for harm. The strong are dangerous to themselves most of all. They fall in love with their own severity and accept punishments they did not earn. The priestly spirit educates them so thoroughly that they learn to police themselves. The outer jail becomes unnecessary. The cell inside your head has better staffing. Another character appears, the herd. Not stupid, not evil, but organized around ease. The herd wants safety in a rhythm that can be counted on grass, sleep, alarm, repeat. The herd's morality is simple. Suspicion of the outsider, the noisy, the fast. It achieves control less by rules than by temperature. It cools. It stares. It ostracizes. It does not fight. It smothers. In this climate, all spikes are dangerous. Verticals must be flattened or hidden. The shepherds learn to speak for the herd. We are happy. We are safe. We need no more. The last man arrives blinking, comfortable, contemptuous of storms, and declares himself the end of history. Nietzsche's stomach turns. He is not merely cranky at comfort. He smells the cost. When the air is controlled for decades, lungs forget how to burn. When risks are described only as harms, courage atrophies. When all experience is filtered through moral protocols designed to prevent offense, nobody says what they see. Truth becomes whatever allows us to keep sitting. In such a world, resentment swells like a weather balloon. It searches for objects to anchor itself to. A person to cancel, a group to denounce, a word to outlaw, a statue to pull down, a joke to anathematize. Control expands with each small victory, until the victory is a system that cannot remember how to celebrate anything except the removal of another danger. There is psychology beneath the politics. Control is anxiety's child. If you wake each day haunted by a formless threat, worthlessness, abandonment, the too bright that rules calm you. You begin to believe that if everyone would just behave, the ache would stop. You become a missionary of your ache. You build small institutions, families, teams, fandoms, whose storm flags read. No surprises. Love becomes management. Friendship becomes compliance. Art becomes messaging. Individuality becomes a liability unless it is safely awed in approved ways. Wildness, which includes the possibility of grace, is replaced by programs. But suspense needs a reversal. Nietzsche does not let anyone off, least of all himself. He asks, what if your control is not simply about weakness, but about a distorted will to power? What if the person who looks docile is simply expressing power with tools that do not look like swords? What if the hunger to regulate and punish is itself a kind of intoxication? He sees it in intellectuals who cannot pound a nail but can dismantle a culture, in a bureaucrat who never raised a barn but can shut down a festival, in a saint who never wrote a song but can censor a musician. The will to power loves stages. Control is a theater where you can be central without being creative. The stage has lighting tricks. One is pity. Nietzsche is not against compassion. He is against pity as spectacle, a stance that turns the other into a prop for your goodness, a means to assert moral rank without risking anything real. Pity as performance can justify control because they cannot be trusted. The poor must be managed. The sick must be administrated. The weak must be protected from their own appetites. Soon enough, everyone qualifies as weak. The manager smiles. The budget grows. The world becomes a clinic with no doctor. He hears another trick, truth as cudgel. If your mantra is, I just tell it like it is, perhaps you are not brave but uncharitable. If your banner reads science, perhaps you are not a seeker of knowledge, but a lover of rules with numbers on them. If your slogan is the common good, perhaps you fear the uncommon good, the particular genius that breaks forms. He loves truth. He hates truth reduced to a utensil for domination. Control needs a doctrine. It borrows the closest one and impoverishes it. The suspense thickens not because villains grow sharper, but because the line between them and you grows thin. You have already shouted without risking. You have already moralized where you could have made. You have already preferred the smugness of small victories to the vulnerability of building something someone could mock. The priest lives gently in your chest. He is not a stranger. He is the part of you that wants a guarantee before it will love anything. And then the pivot that unknots the tangle. Nietzsche is not merely accusing weak people of seeking control. He is describing a universal temptation. When we cannot master ourselves, we attempt to master the world. The will to power is not a monster only strong people ride. It is the heartbeat of growth itself. Even a plant leans toward the light. Even a phrase hunts the right mouth. To be alive is to expand. When expansion is blocked from within, by fear, by history, by frailty, it will seek a detour. Control is that detour. It is the will to power expressing itself sideways. If control is a detour, what is the road? Self-overcoming. The word sounds like a lecture until you feel what it does to your back. It straightens it. Self-overcoming is not self-denial. It is not a purge of appetite in favor of moral quiet. It is the art of turning your energies against your smallest self first. Before you correct the world, you negotiate with your envy, your laziness, your craving for applause disguised as justice. You make something, however small, so that the muscle remembers what creation feels like. You become dangerous to your fear, and then the world shifts in size. This is why Nietzsche loves artists and builders. They do not need to control in order to feel alive. Their work gives them a rule that no bureaucracy can match, the rule of form, of rhythm, of the thing being made in conversation with its maker. A composer cannot legislate a symphony into being. A symphony arrives when the composer submits to something larger and becomes a servant with a spine. If you know that joy shaping something tough and good, you do not need to regulate your neighbor's breath to escape your emptiness. His diagnosis of weakness seeking control is also a mirror held up to epics. When a culture loses confidence in life, it reaches for systems. It becomes obsessed with measurement, with surveillance, with endless committees that turn desire into data. Safety becomes the only sacred thing. Excellence a suspect. Transcendence a liability. Tragedy embarrassing. This is not about the presence of systems. It is about their elevation into gods. Nietzsche cries blasphemy, not because he hates caution, but because he loves magnitude. If you require life to be tamed to tolerate it, you will shrink until the world resembles a waiting room. He presses deeper. The ascetic ideal is not just a trick play on the strong. It is also a bandage on a genuine wound. He respects the priest because the priest kept the sick from despair by giving their suffering a story. The real opposition is not between the strong and the weak, but between those who can transfigure suffering and those who can only domesticate it. The priest domesticates. He writes rules, reduces risks, and offers guilt as an anesthetic. The creator transfigures. She takes pain and makes a form that dignifies it. A poem, a code, a city, a joke that breaks a curse without humiliating anyone. The same material hurt becomes a cathedral or a prison, depending on who touches it. Here is the shift that lifts the argument from revenge to responsibility. You do not escape the priest by killing him. You learn his craft and turn it toward life. Instead of shrinking appetite, you teach it to dance. Instead of stamping out hazard, you cultivate courage. Instead of controlling others, you master your own exaggerations, so that when you do wield influence, it doesn't taste like your wound. The will to power matures into will to style, the ability to give your energies a shape that blesses more than it burns. Nietzsche's language of master and slave is historical dynamite, easy to misuse. It is a map of dispositions, not an advertisement for domination. The master moralist says good to what rises in him: courage, pride, generosity. The slave moralist says good to what lowers others: meekness, guilt, sameness. The former risks becoming a brute. The latter risks becoming a spider. Both are unfinished. The completed human, if we can use such a phrase, reconciles action and mercy, elevation and solidarity. He rallies us not to choose cruelty, but to choose creation over regulation as our first response to discomfort. From there, law can be honest, protection of the vulnerable without embalming them, justice without envy, equality before the law without hostility to superiority in achievement. You hear another Nietzschean refrain: amor fati, not a tattoo, a discipline. Love your fate, the hard parts included. The person who loves fate does not need to edit reality. He does not require the world to become smaller to feel okay. He prefers what is to what should have been, because he has learned how to turn the given into a craft. Such a person still passes laws, still sets boundaries, still says no, and means it. But those no's grow out of a deeper yes. The air feels different around them. You sense permission to become larger, not the threat of shrinking if you breathe too loudly. In the heart of his critique lies the idea of bad conscience, the animal that turned against itself when we built fences. Our instincts, unable to express themselves outwardly, go inward, gnaw, invent sins. Bad conscience is a laboratory of control. You become an administrator of your own humiliation. You rate your worth on a scale carved by ancestors who feared their freedom. Nietzsche does not advise returning to forests. He advises an alchemy. Turn the inwardness that bred self-torture into inwardness that birthed style, self-command, a faithfulness to your own tempo. This is lawfulness that doesn't smell like a jail. He also offers the most scandalous kindness in his Book of Scorn. Forgive yourself for being tempted by control. It is a natural response to fear. You are not damned for wanting a smaller world. You are summoned to build a larger soul. That summons will embarrass you. It will send you into rooms where you are not in charge. It will force you to practice the virtue you mocked when others preached it: patience. But this patience is not passivity. It is the time required for a deep yes to ripen, so that when you speak, you do not need to shout. Perhaps the clearest test arrives here. When you feel the itch to control, create. When you feel the heat of resentment, praise something that threatens you. When you feel the seduction of pity as power, help someone in a way that costs you anonymity. When you want to legislate a virtue, embody it at a scale that humiliates your need to be seen. When you want to flatten difference, learn from a greatness that makes you jealous until the jealousy turns into apprenticeship. The transformation is not a theory. It is a calendar. It grows calluses and grace in the same hand. There is a mood that comes when you realize the size of the task. The slogans you enjoyed, the enemies who simplified your days, the superiority that warmed you on nights you were afraid. These begin to look like toys in a room you have outgrown. Nietzsche is hard on the world because he wants you to feel this. A melancholy that refuses to anesthetize itself with control for one more hour. He trusts sadness when it is honest. It digs where happiness glides. What do we do with the ache that made control attractive? We name it. We say to the child inside the moralist, you were lonely, so you drew grids on the sky. You were powerless, so you became an authority. You were overlooked, so you invented the virtue of smallness. You were hurt by chaos, so you preached order until your sermons sounded like prayers for a winter that never ends. Then, with gentleness that would surprise Nietzsche, if you only knew him by his thunder, we bring the child outside. The weather is cold. There are mountains. There are also fires that do not burn you for being glad. Nothing in him despises care. He despises the counterfeit, care that avoids the risk of loving real people. Control replaces eros with management. Your lover becomes a project plan. Your friend becomes a compliance partner. Your child becomes a brand ambassador for your values. Your city becomes a spreadsheet. To be human is to tremble when you love, because the thing you love has a will that is not yours. Control cannot stand that tremble. It wants guarantees. It forgets that the only guarantee is a life not lived. The tragedy of control is not the prison. It is the mist cathedral. Every time we freeze life to make it safe, we kill a version of ourselves that could have learned a new dance. Nietzsche loves dancers. Not because he wants frivolity, but because dance is the body confessing it trusts the floor. Trust is the opposite of control. It is not blind. It is watchful and brave. It knows the fall is possible and moves anyway. When a culture dances, it is strong. When a culture regulates the dance until no one moves without permission, it is weak pretending to be kind. He is tender too with the sick. He was one of them. He does not demand that the exhausted leap. He asks only that you do not make a shrine to exhaustion and call it wisdom. Rest, he urges, so that you can again prefer creation to control. Rest that returns you to appetite. Rest that teaches you to say yes with your whole body. The rest that control offers is an ice bath. The rest that strength offers is a river where you relearn your shape. You begin to spot the difference in yourself. A rule emerges. Do you want to control because you are hurt right now? Then do not legislate. If a law must be made, make it when you are clear, not when your wound is at the microphone. Do you want to punish because you are jealous? Then give your jealousy a task. Translate it into training. Do you want to silence because you are afraid? Then find a small room where you can listen without being overwhelmed, and do not make your fear the weather for the whole city. Weakness seeks control when it refuses to be met. Meet it. The meeting hurts. It ends the need to hurt others. There is a cosmic echo here. Our species learned control as a defense against catastrophes, famine, plague, war. Necessary controls saved villages. Nietzsche is not a vandal of this memory. He wants us to know when the emergency ended, and we forgot how to stop being emergency managers. He wants citizens again, not patients. The citizen is capable of refusal and worships no manager. He can serve without servility. She can protect without policing joy. They can suffer without inventing a theology that punishes the healthy for being healthy. The emotional gravity intensifies at the frontier where you face, for the first time, an authority you built to avoid risk and decide to leave it. Counselors know this as the moment a client stops explaining and begins choosing. The body shakes. The rules whisper. The familiar is better than the true, they say. Nietzsche stands in the doorway like a weathered teacher who hates attendance and loves the sound of a mind changing. He does not promise safety. He promises sight. Become who you are is not a slogan. It is a sentence that returns you to the crime scene of your abandonment and asks you to retrieve the evidence, your strength. Of course you will fail. Control is a narcotic. It gives clean lines to messy days. The relapse looks responsible. You will dress it in words. You will call it boundaries when it is avoidance. You will call it principle when it is pettiness. You will call it care when it is custody. The only cure is beauty that humiliates your appetite for power because it makes you want to serve without owning. Find a beauty that does this. Music that makes you dumb with gratitude. Work that makes you sweat and then smile. Friendships that make you apologize and feel larger. A craft that fights you until you fall in love with its law. There's a humbler admission that seals the lesson. We all contain weak and strong. Even your best day has a priest in it, a clerk, a judge. Even your worst day has a warrior, an artist, a friend who dares you to live. The question is not what you are. The question is which inner faction you resource. Do you feed the part that wants to build, or the part that wants to file reports on people who are building? The simplest discipline, touch something, you want to exist, starves the clerk. The world needs your creations more than your supervision. Think of the last time you felt the hunger to manage someone else's breath. Maybe it was a stranger online, a colleague who dared a thought, a friend whose joy surprised you into contempt, a lover whose unpredictability frightened the small king in you. You reached for the script. You asked for rules. You wanted the broad river to funnel into a pipe you could fit in your poem. Catch that moment. Hold it like a bird made of static. Name it gently. This is how weakness prays. Now imagine another gesture. The rule stays in your pocket. You make something instead? A paragraph. A table. A plan that exposes you to judgment without a shield of virtue. You speak to your friend in a way that risks them leaving and hopes they will stay. You let your lover be other long enough for desire to breathe. You enter a room already on fire with opinions and anoint your tongue with silence until what you say is not a reaction but a seed. Control collapses into craft. The day becomes expensive in the way that makes life feel earned. Nietzsche will not walk you home. He sends you into weather with a pack of sentences that cut and console. Beware the sweetness of pity when it is an alibi for power. Die to your spite. Laugh when you hear your inner priest clear his throat. Protect children, not your ego. Protect the vulnerable, not your boredom. Practice saying no like a builder, as an act that makes space for a higher yes, not as a reflex against your own fear. Honor law as a threshold keeper, not a muse. When in doubt, ask, am I shrinking the world because I am unwilling to grow? There is a final paradox wrapped in the riddle of control. The strongest people you will meet are easy around freedom. They can let others be without a tremor. They do not need to engineer reality to find a pulse. Their influence feels like weather you want to stand in. They do not police you into goodness. They lure you toward it. This is what power looks like when it is not compensating for a wound, not a grip, but a gravity. We live in an age of systems that call themselves care. Many of them are real. Some of them are cages. You will not always know which is which until you try to build something and discover which doors lock. And then you will have to decide whether you prefer the ease of blame to the discipline of creation. To resist the temptation to control is not to become chaotic. It is to commit to a higher order, the order of a life that can afford risks because it has learned to steer. One day you will be asked to make the kind of decision that reveals your actual ethics. A colleague will fail. A child you love will defy you. A community will split. The herd will call for comfort. The priest in your chest will request compliance and a speech. Nietzsche wants you to surprise yourself. Say something that costs you. Choose in favor of growth. Keep a door open where a lock would be easier. Cut out your pettiness the way a sailor cuts a rope in a storm. Replace your edicts with an invitation. Come make with me. You may lose applause. You may lose control of your own legend. You may, for a while, feel weaker because you are no longer insulated by rules that flatter you. But you will gain strength in the only currency that is not counterfeit, the capacity to endure reality without making it smaller. The joy that comes is not loud. It is the warmth of a furnace after a long cold, a sense that you are in alignment with the current you used to dam. The world will remain dangerous. You will have more uses for your courage than your clipboard. And when you are tempted again, as you will be to replace love with management, step outside. Listen to the loud earth. Watch something that cannot be controlled. A storm, a child lost in play, a musician who has forgotten the audience, a street that sings on its own timetable. Remember that laws were invented to protect the conditions for such moments, not to sterilize them. Remember that control is a tool, not a faith. Then walk back inside and write one less rule than you thought you needed. Leave room for someone stronger than you to teach you how to be brave. If this opened your eyes, subscribe to Boring History, because the truth is never boring.